My name is Laurel, and I'll never forget the night my sister's stupid prank landed me in the hospital. Before I continue, please subscribe to show karma you're on the right side. Anyways, it wasn't the kind of memory you can blur out with time. It stays sharp, like glass lodged under your skin. She yanked a chair out from under me at dinner, and I fell, crashing to the floor so hard that my leg snapped. The sound was sickening, the pain immediate and overwhelming. Everyone around the table laughed first, as though it was just another one of Chloe's clever little jokes. But then the laughter died when they saw me screaming, unable to stand, clutching my leg. That's the part that replays in my head, not the moment of the fall itself, but the seconds after. The way their faces shifted from amusement to discomfort, the way no one rushed to help me, the way I felt like the punchline even as I lay on the floor with tears running down my face. My sister muttered, "It was just a joke." Like that excused everything. My parents whispered among themselves, but no one held my hand, no one knelt beside me, no one said it was going to be okay. Hours later, after the paramedics came and I was wheeled away, I lay in a hospital bed with my leg in a cast, the fluorescent lights buzzing above me. The pain was sharp, yes, but what cut the deepest wasn't the broken bone. It was the emptiness of the waiting room. I kept expecting the door to open, for someone from my family to appear, for a familiar face to remind me I wasn't completely alone. But no one came. Not my parents, not Chloe. Not a single person from the house I had grown up in thought it was worth the trip. That loneliness weighed heavier than the plaster cast wrapped around my leg. Every beep of the monitor, every passing nurse, every flicker of movement in the hallway made me lift my head, hoping. But it was never them. It was strangers who showed more concern than my own blood. A nurse offered me a cup of water and a gentle smile. A doctor explained the recovery would take weeks, maybe months, before I could walk without crutches. They spoke with more care than I had ever heard at my own dinner table. The pain of a broken bone fades with time. The cast eventually comes off. You learn to walk again, to put weight on what was once fragile. But the pain of realizing you don't matter to the people who should love you most, that lingers. That reshapes you. That turns into a scar you carry long after the body has healed. That night taught me something I had ignored for too long. I wasn't just unlucky. I wasn't just sensitive. I wasn't part of their picture, not really. I was the shadow they laughed at, the afterthought they dismissed. And lying there in that hospital bed, abandoned, I finally saw the truth. My family's silence was louder than any words they had ever spoken. From the outside, we looked like the kind of family people envied. Holiday cards with matching sweaters, the kind with glittery lettering that said, "From our family to yours." Every photo carefully posed, my parents in the middle, Chloe shining at the front, and me tucked into the edge of the frame, smiling because that's what I was supposed to do. At church on Sundays, we walked in like a polished unit, sitting in the same pew every week, heads held high. Neighbors would stop us afterward and say things like, "You're such a close-knit family," or, "You must be so proud of your girls." My parents always beamed at those comments, drinking them in like fuel, but behind those smiles, it was different. I don't think outsiders ever guessed how much the balance tipped inside our house. It wasn't screaming matches or broken plates that defined us, but something quieter, something that could almost look invisible to the people who didn't live it. Everything tilted toward Chloe. If she got a B on a test, it was met with praise. "You tried your best, sweetheart." If I brought home an A, the reaction was lukewarm. "Good, keep it up." Chloe's soccer games were an event, the entire family packing up the car, cheering her name on the sidelines. My art shows, my debate competitions, my choir recitals, They were optional, easy to skip, often brushed aside with excuses like, "We'll make the next one." It wasn't that they ignored me completely. It was worse than that. They performed just enough for the outside world to believe everything was perfect, while inside, I was the second draft, the afterthought. Chloe was the sun we all revolved around. She was praised for her charm, her beauty, her ability to make people laugh. I was measured against her without anyone ever saying it outright. If Chloe walked into a room, all eyes went to her. If I followed, it was as though I had simply filled the background. I remember once, a neighbor told my mother how lovely it must be to have two beautiful daughters. My mother smiled, touched Chloe's hair and said, "Yes, we're very lucky with her. Her, just her." I was standing right there, holding the casserole dish we had brought. No one noticed the way my smile faltered. Family dinners were no different. The stories were Chloe's stories. The laughter was at Chloe's jokes. The spotlight seemed glued to her, while I was expected to listen, nod, and accept that this was how things worked. If I spoke up, the conversation moved on before I could finish. If I sat quiet, no one noticed at all. To everyone else, we were perfect. To everyone else, we were proof of a picture book family. But I knew the truth. The perfection was a facade, one built on my silence and Chloe's shine. And if I ever dared to question it, I was reminded in subtle, cutting ways that Chloe was the favorite, and I was lucky just to be part of the picture at all. Chloe had always been the one everyone gravitated toward, like a magnet pulling every ounce of attention to her. From the moment we were little, it was obvious she was the favorite. Teachers adored her because she had that smile, that easy way of talking that made adults chuckle and praise her confidence. Neighbors doted on her, always commenting on how pretty she was, how bright her future looked. At family gatherings, relatives barely let her sit down before showering her with compliments, her hair, her clothes, her natural charm. They said she had it all, and maybe she did. But what it meant for me was that there was nothing left over. If I brought home a certificate from school, the kind I had worked for weeks to earn, it was met with a nod and a, "That's nice, Laurel." If Chloe walked in with a ribbon for participating in something, it was treated like a golden trophy. My parents pinned it on the fridge and bragged about it to their friends. I don't think they realized how blatant it was. Or maybe they did and just didn't care. To them, Chloe was proof that they were doing something right, that they had raised a child the world admired. I was the background character, the one they expected to behave, to blend, to exist without taking up too much space. The comparison was constant, even when they weren't saying her name out loud. I'd be getting ready for school and hear my mother sigh about how Chloe never took so long to get dressed. I'd speak up at dinner and watch my father immediately turn to Chloe for her opinion instead, as though hers carried more weight. Sometimes the words were sharper. "Chloe just has that spark," my mom once said while I was sitting right there. "Not everyone does." She didn't need to add the rest. I knew she meant me. Chloe leaned into it too. She knew she was the favorite, and she knew how to use it. If she teased me, called me boring, mocked the way I laughed, my parents brushed it off with a smile. "She's just joking." If I ever snapped back, I was the one told to calm down, to stop being sensitive. It didn't matter that the scales were uneven. In our house, Chloe could never be wrong. I don't think I ever wanted to outshine her. I just wanted to matter. I wanted someone to look at me with the same pride, to hear my stories with the same patience, to celebrate my wins with the same joy. But Chloe had taken up all the oxygen in the room, and my parents were content to let me live on whatever scraps of attention were left. She was the golden sister, admired, adored, untouchable. And me? I was just Laurel, the other one. The one who could be overlooked without anyone even realizing it. It was never one big moment that defined the way I felt in that house. It was the small things. The tiny, sharp cuts that no one else noticed, but that I carried with me long after the laughter had died down. Chloe had this way of interrupting me, sliding her voice over mine like my words didn't matter. I'd start to share something about my day, how I aced a test, or how a teacher had complimented my essay. And before I could finish the sentence, she'd chime in with a story about herself. Everyone at the table would turn to her, laughing, listening, forgetting that I had ever spoken. My parents never corrected her. They never asked me to finish what I was saying. Instead, they laughed along, nodding as though Chloe was the only one worth hearing. It didn't matter how many times it happened, whether it was at the dinner table, at family gatherings, or even when guests were over. My voice always got lost in hers, and their silence told me they didn't mind. Sometimes it was jokes at my expense. They weren't vicious, at least not in the way outsiders would think. It was the kind of joking that everyone brushed off as harmless. Like the time Chloe teased me for how I ran during gym class, flailing my arms a little too much. My dad chuckled and said, "Well, at least she's trying." The table roared with laughter, and I sat there with a smile plastered on my face, cheeks burning. Or the time my mom mocked the way I sang in the car, calling it cute, in that way that really meant embarrassing. Chloe laughed so hard she nearly cried. I learned to laugh along, because if I didn't, they'd call me uptight, sensitive, unable to take a joke. Then there were the inside jokes, the ones I was never part of. Chloe and my parents had entire conversations built on shared looks, whispered comments, and punchlines I wasn't in on. They'd burst into laughter, and when I asked what was so funny, they'd just shake their heads. "You wouldn't get it," Chloe would say, smirking. I always wanted to ask, why wouldn't I? I live here too, but I never did. I swallowed the questions because the answer was obvious. I wasn't supposed to get it. I wasn't part of their circle. These small dismissals piled up, layer after layer, until they felt heavier than outright cruelty. A cruel word you can fight back against. But the quiet, constant reminders that you're less, that you're invisible, that burrows deep. It changes the way you see yourself. I started second-guessing everything I said, everything I did. Was I boring? Did my stories not matter? Was I really just background noise in my own family? The cuts were subtle, but they shaped me. They built a pattern I couldn't unsee. Chloe was the star, my parents were her audience, and I was just there to clap along. Even before the prank, before the hospital bed, I had already been erased one small cut at a time. Family dinners in our house were less about eating together and more about centering Chloe. The table always seemed to belong to her, as if every plate, every fork, every conversation was placed there to highlight her life. The moment we sat down, she would start talking, and the spotlight shifted in her direction without effort. My parents leaned in, hanging on her words, laughing at her jokes before she even finished them. She knew she had their attention, and she basked in it. I remember once trying to share about a science project I had worked on for weeks. I waited until there was a pause in the chatter, then carefully began explaining how my teacher had picked my model to be displayed in the school lobby. Chloe didn't even let me finish. She cut in with a story about how a boy in her class had asked her out. Instantly, the attention swung to her, my father chuckling, my mother gasping in mock delight. The science project might as well have never existed. I sat there, my food growing cold, wondering why I even bothered speaking at all. It was always like that. My successes were minimized with a pat on the head or a half-hearted, "That's nice." Chloe's smallest achievements became headlines. If she baked cookies in home ec, the story was retold for days, as though she'd won a culinary award. If I got a perfect grade, it was met with a nod and quickly forgotten. Sometimes the dismissals weren't even subtle. I would start a sentence, something simple about my day, and my father would turn to Chloe mid-thought, asking her a question instead. My voice would trail off, fading into the clinking of silverware. Chloe rarely even noticed she'd stolen the floor. Why would she? She had been raised to believe the stage was hers. The divide wasn't just in words, it was in the way they looked at us. Chloe's stories were met with eye contact, nods, smiles. Mine were met with distracted glances, their eyes already waiting for Chloe to speak again. Even my laughter seemed to go unheard, lost under the sound of hers echoing across the table. I learned quickly to shrink myself, to eat quietly, to nod at the right moments, to laugh when they did, even if I didn't understand the joke. Because the one time I pushed back, interrupting Chloe to finish my thought, I was scolded. "Don't be rude," my mother said sharply, as if I was the one stealing something that didn't belong to me. That was when I realized the table would never be equal. It was Chloe's stage, and I was expected to play the silent background. Looking back, those dinners were rehearsals for everything else that happened in our family. They were proof that I was invisible in a house that was supposed to see me. Every meal ended with me feeling smaller, my worth chipped away, while Chloe left glowing, full not just from food, but from the steady diet of praise and attention only she was ever given. The night it happened, the house was packed. Relatives filled every corner, voices overlapping, dishes clattering as food was passed around. I remember the smell of roast chicken and garlic bread, the kind of meal that was supposed to bring everyone together. I had braced myself for another evening of being talked over, another chorus of Chloe's stories stealing the spotlight, but I hadn't expected what came next. Chloe was in her element that night. She had everyone laughing before we even sat down, moving around the room like the star of her own show. I could feel the familiar knot in my stomach as I slid into the background. I thought maybe if I just kept my head down, I could get through it quietly. But Chloe had other plans. As I moved to take my seat at the long dining table, balancing a plate in my hands, I didn't notice her slipping behind me. There was a quick tug, a scrape of wood against tile, and suddenly the chair wasn't there anymore. I dropped hard, the shock of it knocking the air out of me. But it wasn't the fall that did it. It was the way my leg twisted under me when I hit the ground. The sound came first, a snap that cut through the noise of laughter and conversation. For a split second, everyone thought it was funny. The room erupted in chuckles, a chorus of, "Oh, Chloe," and "You're terrible," as if this was just another one of her harmless pranks. But then came my scream. Raw, loud, the kind that no one could mistake for laughter. The smiles froze. I couldn't move. Pain shot up my leg like fire, hot and blinding. I remember clutching the edge of the table trying to pull myself up, but my body wouldn't cooperate. The chatter died, replaced by a stunned silence broken only by my sobbing breaths. My mother muttered something about me being dramatic, until she saw the way my leg bent wrong. My father looked away, as though not meeting my eyes could erase what had just happened. Someone finally called for an ambulance. The wait felt endless, every second stretching into hours. I lay there on the floor, humiliated, surrounded by the people who had spent my whole life ignoring me, and now were watching me writhe in pain like I was an inconvenience. Chloe stood to the side, arms crossed, her face pale, but still defensive. "It was just a joke," she muttered, like that could undo the damage. When the paramedics arrived, they lifted me gently onto a stretcher. I heard the words broken leg and clean fracture, but my mind was too foggy to process anything beyond the throbbing ache and the humiliation. As they carried me out, I looked back one last time. No one followed. No one rushed to grab their coat or climb into the ambulance. They just stood there, frozen in their own guilt or disbelief. The door shut behind me, and in that moment, I knew. To them, I had always been expendable. And now I was leaving with a broken leg, but the deeper break had already happened years ago. This just made it undeniable. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was the ceiling. Harsh white panels buzzing faintly, fluorescent lights spilling across my face. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was, only that something hurt so badly I could hardly breathe. Then I shifted, and the pain shot up my leg like fire. I looked down and saw it, heavy and immovable, a cast wrapped tight from thigh to ankle, my body weighed down not just by plaster, but by the reality of what had happened. A doctor appeared at my side, calm, practiced, with a clipboard in his hands. He explained what I already knew, but didn't want to hear. "It's a clean fracture," he said, his voice steady, clinical. "You'll need crutches, at least 3 months before you can walk normally, and physical therapy after that." He spoke as if it were routine, as if broken bones were just bumps on a timeline. But to me, it felt like a sentence. My independence, gone, just like that. The pain was sharp, yes, but it wasn't what crushed me most. What hurt wasn't in my leg. It was in the silence around me. I turned my head toward the door, waiting for it to open, waiting for someone to walk through. A mother's worried face, a father's heavy sigh, even Chloe muttering some weak excuse about how she didn't mean it. Anyone. I would have settled for anyone. But the minutes stretched into hours, and no one came. The nurses moved around me with quiet efficiency, adjusting my blanket, checking my vitals, offering me water. Their kindness stung in its own way, because they were strangers, and they were giving me more care in passing moments than my family had in years. Each time a nurse peeked into the room, I thought maybe this time it would be them. Maybe this time my family had decided to come, to sit beside me, to prove I still mattered. But every time, it was just another stranger with a clipboard or a kind smile. At one point, I asked the nurse if anyone had come by, if anyone had called to ask about me. She shook her head gently, apologetically. "No visitors yet," she said. Yet, as if she still believed someone might show up. But I knew better. Lying there, staring at the pale walls, I realized I wasn't just in a hospital bed because of a broken leg. I was there because of something much deeper, something harder to heal. Years of being overshadowed, dismissed, erased, it had all led here, to this moment where my pain was mine alone. I thought about the laughter that had filled the room when I fell, the way their amusement had rung out before my scream cut through it. That laughter followed me into the silence now, echoing louder than the beeping machines beside me. The cast would come off one day. I would walk again. But the empty waiting room, that emptiness would stay with me, proof that I could break in front of them and they still wouldn't come. That was the real injury, the one no doctor could fix. I stared at the door as if I could will it open. Every time footsteps echoed in the hallway, my heart jumped, waiting for the handle to turn. I imagined my mother rushing in with worried eyes, my father carrying a bouquet he'd grabbed last minute from the hospital gift shop, Chloe offering some nervous apology through tears. I imagined the way it should have been if I belonged in this family, but the door never opened. Hours passed, and the emptiness grew heavier. The waiting room outside was silent. No muffled voices, no shuffling chairs, no whispers about how badly they'd messed up. Nothing. The nurses came and went, their movements soft and professional. One brought me ice chips, another adjusted the angle of my bed. They offered me kindness in their quiet way, but they weren't the people I was waiting for. Every time they left, I turned back to the door, still hoping, still waiting. My phone sat on the tray beside me. I picked it up again and again, staring at the black screen, refreshing messages that never came. No, how are you feeling? No, we'll be there soon. Not even a half-hearted excuse. Just silence. It was almost worse than if they'd sent something cruel, because silence was proof they didn't care enough to type a single word. At one point, I opened the family group chat, hoping maybe I had missed something. But the only new message wasn't for me. It was from Chloe. A picture of a chocolate mousse she had ordered after dinner. A caption that read, "Best dessert ever." The same dinner where I had fallen, where my leg had broken under the weight of her prank. My scream hadn't followed her home. My hospital bed didn't haunt her. She had gone back to the table, laughed, eaten dessert, and then shared it like nothing had happened. I stared at that picture until my vision blurred. The contrast was too sharp. Me here, lying in a hospital bed, cast heavy on my leg, alone under buzzing fluorescent lights, while Chloe smiled over dessert as though I had never existed. It was the cruelest kind of erasure, not in words, but in indifference. The hours stretched into night. The machines beeped steadily. My body ached, but what ached more was knowing that I was waiting for people who were never going to come. The empty waiting room became a mirror, showing me exactly where I stood in their lives, on the outside, always on the outside. Eventually, I stopped looking at the door. I stopped refreshing my phone. The truth had already arrived, heavier than any bouquet, louder than any apology. They weren't coming. They weren't worried. They had chosen their dessert, their laughter, their comfort over me. And for the first time, I began to understand what that meant. I could break in half in front of them, and they would still look away. The first night was the hardest. Every time I opened my eyes, I expected to see a familiar face at the edge of my bed. Instead, it was the quiet shuffle of nurses moving in and out, their soft voices asking how my pain was, their hands careful as they adjusted my pillows. One nurse in particular, a woman named Denise, lingered longer than she had to. She asked if I needed water, if I wanted the blinds raised a little to let the morning sun in. When she noticed me struggling with the blanket, she tucked it gently around me and smiled. "You're not alone here," she said, as if she could read my thoughts. It wasn't the kind of comfort that came with grand gestures, but it was more warmth than I'd felt from my family in years. Later that afternoon, the door finally opened in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't my parents or Chloe. It was Julia, a coworker from my office. She held a small bouquet of flowers, nothing fancy, just daisies wrapped in paper from the corner shop. Her face twisted with shock when she saw me lying there, my leg propped up in a cast. "I can't believe no one's here," she said quietly, almost to herself. She stayed for nearly an hour, filling the silence with stories from work, making me laugh even through the pain. Before she left, she squeezed my hand and promised she'd check in again soon. That moment stuck with me. Julia wasn't bound to me by blood. She didn't owe me her time. And yet, she showed up. She cared enough to sit by my bed, to bring something bright to a room that felt so heavy. She cared enough to notice my absence from the office and come see if I was okay. Meanwhile, the people who shared my last name couldn't even bother to send a single text. In the days that followed, it was more of the same. Nurses remembered my name and how I liked my tea. A volunteer dropped off a book cart and chatted about the stories she thought I might like. Even the janitor, who came in to sweep the floors, asked how I was holding up, and wished me a fast recovery. Each small act of kindness pressed deeper into the truth. Strangers were filling the role my family had abandoned. It was disorienting at first, but then it became clear. Blood doesn't guarantee love. Family isn't proven by last names or matching holiday cards. It's proven in moments like this, when someone chooses to stand beside you without obligation. As I lay there, surrounded by people who technically had no reason to care, I realized something I had been denying my whole life. Maybe I'd been waiting for love in the wrong places. Maybe the ones who truly cared were the ones I had found on my own, not the ones I had been born to. That realization hurt, but it also freed me. Recovery was brutal in ways I hadn't expected. The first time I tried to shift from the hospital bed to the chair, my arms shook under the weight of the crutches. Every movement sent sharp jolts up my leg, reminding me of just how broken I was. The cast felt like a prison wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. Nights were the worst. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, every throb in my leg sinking with the memory of Chloe's smirk, the laughter, the silence that followed. But slowly, through the frustration and exhaustion, I started to notice something else. I was learning to move forward without them. The physical therapy sessions tested me in ways school and work never had. Balancing, stretching, forcing muscles that had gone weak to hold me up again. It wasn't just physical pain, it was emotional. I hated feeling helpless, hated relying on others just to get to the bathroom or pour a glass of water. But every time I felt like quitting, there was someone there who wasn't my family. The nurse who reminded me to breathe through the exercises, a friend who picked me up after therapy and drove me home without complaint. Even a neighbor who carried groceries up the stairs when he saw me struggling. Their support was simple but steady, and it planted a seed inside me. Maybe I was stronger than I'd been told my whole life. At home, things were quiet. My phone remained empty of messages from my parents or Chloe. No check-ins, no apologies. At first, it stung every time I unlocked the screen and saw nothing. But gradually, I realized that their silence was a gift in disguise. It gave me space to think about who I was without them, space to see that my worth wasn't tied to whether they showed up. I began to pour my energy into healing not just my body, but my life. I read books I had always put off, filling the long hours with stories that reminded me of resilience. I wrote in a journal, documenting each painful step forward, and with each entry I could see my progress, even if it felt small at the time. I reminded myself daily that the cast would come off, the crutches would disappear, and my legs would carry me again. And when that happened, it wouldn't be because of the family who abandoned me. It would be because of me. The first day I managed to cross my apartment on crutches without collapsing, I laughed out loud. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't fast, but it was mine. I realized then that every shaky step, every long night of frustration, was building something inside me that had nothing to do with them. Strength, independence, the ability to stand, even if it took me longer, even if it hurt more, on my own terms. The broken leg wasn't the end, it was the turning point, and with every painful step forward, I proved to myself that I could stand without them. It started with whispers, the kind that trickle into your life when you're not even looking for them. A mutual acquaintance mentioned offhand that Chloe wasn't as adored at work as she let everyone believe. I raised an eyebrow, surprised, because in my world, she had always been untouchable. The golden girl. The one whose jokes made everyone laugh, even when they were cruel. But now, people were rolling their eyes instead of chuckling. Her funny pranks were being called what they really were: immature, disruptive, careless. I heard she had been reprimanded after pulling something playful during a team meeting, a stunt that left her boss unimpressed. For years, I had been the one humiliated by her antics. She'd cut me down, interrupt me, make me the punchline, and everyone clapped along. Now it seemed the world was finally catching up. The same behavior that once won her attention was beginning to cost her. Friends who used to indulge her began keeping their distance. One old classmate told me she never grew out of high school. The words stung in their accuracy. Then came the stories about money. I never asked for details, but they slipped through the cracks anyway. Bills piling up, a credit card declined at dinner, a cousin saying she'd borrowed money but hadn't paid it back. The family never talked about it openly, of course. They worked hard to preserve the image. But you can only polish a surface for so long before the cracks show through. Even her relationship, the one they had paraded as perfect, began to fray. A relative mentioned arguments that spilled into public, her partner tired of her constant need to be the center of attention. What had once seemed like a fairy tale pairing now looked more like a performance unraveling behind closed doors. For the first time, Chloe's glow didn't blind everyone in the room. People were starting to see the shadows. I didn't take joy in hearing it, at least not the way some might expect. There wasn't glee or satisfaction in knowing her shine was fading. It was more complicated than that. It was like the balance of the world was correcting itself, showing me that maybe I hadn't been crazy all those years. Maybe I hadn't imagined the favoritism, the constant erasure, the endless comparisons. Maybe the pedestal they had put her on was always fragile, and now the weight of her own choices was pulling it down. Still, a part of me couldn't help but think back to the night of the prank, to the moment my leg snapped, her laughter ringing in my ears as I lay on the floor in agony. She had walked away from that night untouched, while I carried the cast, the crutches, the silence of an empty waiting room. But now it was her turn to feel what it was like when the laughter stopped working, when the audience no longer applauded. For the first time, Chloe wasn't untouchable. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need her approval, or anyone else's, to stand taller than she ever had. The call came on a Tuesday evening, just as I was settling in with a cup of tea. At first, I didn't recognize the number, but when I answered, my mother's voice spilled through the line, sugar-coated in a way it never had been before. "Laurel," she said brightly, "we've missed you." The words caught me off guard. Missed me? This from the woman who hadn't even sent a single text when I lay in a hospital bed with a broken leg? Her tone was warm, but underneath, I could hear it. The tension, the strain of someone rehearsing kindness because they needed something. She went on about how things had been difficult lately. My father chimed in briefly in the background, his voice oddly careful. They asked about me, but not in a way that felt genuine. It wasn't curiosity. It was filler, small talk to soften me before the real reason came out. And sure enough, it did. My mother cleared her throat and asked, "Do you know anyone hiring? Your father's work isn't steady right now, and Chloe's had setbacks. Setbacks. That was her word for it." The golden child, the star of every family dinner, was suddenly struggling. My parents tried to frame it as though it was just a temporary dip, nothing serious, but I could hear the desperation they were trying to hide. Chloe herself grabbed the phone halfway through, her voice chipper, forced. "Hey, Laurel, I was just telling Mom and Dad that you're doing so well these days. You must have so many connections. Maybe you could, put in a word for me?" She let the question hang there, as if she were offering me a chance to prove I was still useful. For a moment, I just listened. It was almost surreal. These were the same people who had sat at that dinner table, who had laughed as I hit the floor and cried out in pain. The same ones who left me in the hospital waiting room, my leg shattered, my heart heavier than the cast. They hadn't cared then. They hadn't even pretended to care. And now, suddenly, I was the one they needed. I could feel my chest tightening, not from sadness but from clarity. Their sudden warmth wasn't real, it was strategy. I was no longer the invisible daughter or the punchline, I was the potential lifeline. They wanted my stability, my resources, the life I had built without them. In their voices, I heard fear. The fear of losing control, of Chloe no longer being the golden one, of their perfect facade collapsing. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch long enough for them to squirm. My mother filled it with another strained laugh. Chloe with a half-hearted, "You know we've always been proud of you." The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Proud? They had never been proud of me a day in their lives. What hurt most wasn't even their request. It was the audacity. The expectation that I would forget the hospital bed, the broken bone, the empty room, and step in like nothing had ever happened. As if love could be erased, rewritten, and bought back with desperation. I didn't raise my voice when I finally answered them. I didn't scream or cry, though part of me wanted to. Instead, I kept my tone steady, almost quiet, because sometimes calm cuts deeper than rage. "Do you remember that night?" I asked. There was silence on the other end of the line. "The night Chloe pulled out my chair at dinner, and I hit the floor so hard my leg snapped?" I waited, giving them a chance to answer, but no one did. My mother made a small sound, as if she wanted to deny it, but the memory was too solid to rewrite. "I remember," I continued, "the way you all laughed at first, like my pain was entertainment. And I remember how fast that laughter died when I screamed. But what I remember most wasn't the fall, or the cast, or the crutches. What I remember most was the hospital bed, the way I stared at the door, waiting for someone, anyone, to come. And not one of you did. You all chose silence. The line stayed quiet. I could picture them sitting there, uncomfortable, fidgeting, maybe even wanting to defend themselves. But I didn't give them the chance. And now you come to me," I said, my voice firm. "Not because you love me, not because you miss me, but because you need something. You want help, money, connections, whatever you think I can offer. But where were you when I needed you? Where were you when I lay there broken and alone?" I could hear Chloe's voice crack as she tried to jump in. "Laurel, it was just a joke?" I cut her off. "That's what you said as I was carried out on a stretcher. It was just a joke." "But jokes don't leave scars. Jokes don't put someone in a cast for months. Jokes don't strip away trust. You took something from me that night, and the rest of you let it happen." I didn't yell. I didn't let my emotions carry me away. I simply said what I needed to say, what I had been holding inside for far too long. "Don't come to me now. Don't reach out when the shine's worn off Chloe and the cracks are showing in your perfect image. You made your choice that night, and I made mine. And my choice is not to save you." When I hung up, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. My phone stayed quiet, but I didn't feel the emptiness anymore. Because I wasn't alone, I had my circle. Friends who had brought me flowers, coworkers who had checked in, nurses who had shown more compassion in one night than my family had in years. Their blood may run in my veins, but family isn't blood. It's the people who stand by you when you fall. And mine had been there all along, just not in the form I'd expected. Her prank put me in a cast. Their silence showed me the truth. They laughed at my pain. I rose anyway, and I built a life stronger than theirs will ever be. Did you enjoy the story? If so, please let me know in the comments. Also, subscribe to support us. Thanks for watching.